Progressive Caucus. This month being co-hosted by our friends from the ACLU of Ohio as part of their Taking Action Tuesdays series. Before we get to the program, I want to point out something that we found by trial and error through, unfortunately, too many Zoom meetings, and that is we don't put links in the chat, because if we do that, people are looking at the link and they're missing the meeting and so forth. But what we will do is tomorrow we'll send an email to everybody who registered for this event, and it will have the links that we're going to talk about for a few minutes here at the beginning. A couple of the links that will be right at the top will be, if you are not a member of the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus and would like to become one, you will see join the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus. If you are not a follower of the ACLU of Ohio, you will see a link to join the ACLU of Ohio. And we also have a couple donate links from our organization, from our organizations, because we depend on donations from folks like you to stay in existence. But then we're going to have some links with upcoming events from the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus and from the ACLU of Ohio. And speaking for CCPC, what we've got coming up in September is, if you are a Cleveland resident, candidates forum for our Ward 13 candidates. We have two very strong progressives, Chris Harsh and Kate Warren, that are running for that seat. And the good news is, since there's no primary, either Kate or Chris are going to bring a strong progressive voice to replace Kevin Kelly to Cleveland City Council. And we also have our September membership meeting. And one of the things that we're going to be following as we get into the fall, and I'm sure our friends from the ACLU of Ohio will be following as well, is what's going to be going on in the Ohio General Assembly. We have horrible anti-voting rights bills being proposed. We have horrible anti-protest bills being proposed. We have horrible banning of critical race theory bills being proposed, and other atrocities as well. And who knows what else might rear their ugly heads. So that's kind of where we're headed in the fall. But on the local level, we've got our endorsed candidates, and we, as well as our friends from the ACLU of Ohio, have endorsed the Citizens for a Safer Cleveland initiative, and we're going to ask folks to work to get that passed. So without further ado, let me introduce Militki Malaku from the ACLU of Ohio, who's going to talk about some upcoming events from her organization and get the bail reform program going.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Militki Malaku. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm the organizing strategist for the Northern region of Ohio of the ACLU. Thank you so much for joining us for a text bank testimony training session. So the structure of this program really is going to be a 10-minute bail reform teach-in, where we're going to review the depths of cash bail and our pretrial detention system. We're going to be going over some core components of two historic bipartisan bail bills now sitting in our legislature, Senate Bill 182 and House Bill 315. And then you all are going to break out into two breakout rooms, one with my colleague Greer Ashbury, organizing strategist of Southwest Ohio, for text banking, an essential way to get the word out, to bring more people into our movement, to again raise awareness of this issue of cash bail and mass incarceration. And then room two with me going over some core tips around submitting testimony. I know many of you have already submitted testimony to the Ohio legislature, have gone in person in Columbus to submit testimony, but there are some tips and tricks that we've compiled for you all today. And again, I'm just so grateful to have CCPC as a longstanding partner on this issue. All right, can everybody share my screen? Obligatory Share screen indicator, just thumbs up if you can. Great.
Every day, thousands of Ohioans are behind bars, not because of what they have done, but because of what they don't have. In Ohio, if you are arrested and brought to jail, you will likely be required to post cash bail. Cash bail, or a money bond, is money paid to secure your release while you await trial. This money is only returned to you after you show up to your future court dates. But the court may keep all of your money for other reasons, or keep some of it for court fees, even if you are later found innocent. If you were required to pay $1,000 for your freedom, could you afford it? What about $10,000? $100,000? If you weren't able to pay for your release, you could face some serious consequences. Do you have any health needs that could get worse in jail? Would you lose your job, your housing? Who would pick up your children from school? Could you lose custody of your children? Will someone even know to feed your pet? Cash bail sets up a two-tiered system of justice in which people are divided into the haves and the have-nots. Wealthy people accused of a crime are able to go home, and people who cannot afford their money bond suffer in jail, even if they haven't been convicted of anything. The system thumbs its nose at the concept of innocent until proven guilty. It preys on low-income individuals and disproportionately affects Black people and other people of color. And cash bail doesn't even make financial sense. It costs Ohio more to keep people in jail than it does to release them with conditions. Case outcomes are also worse for people who remain in jail pre-trial. They are more likely to be convicted, more likely to be sentenced to jail or prison, and their sentences are, on average, 2 to 3 times longer. This is not justice. It harms people, families, and communities. It harms me. It harms you. It harms Ohio. We believe in an Ohio where people are truly innocent until proven guilty, and aren't held in jail simply because they don't have deep pockets. Every day, thousands of
So just as the video described, nationally, there are about 500,000 people who languish in jail simply because they don't have enough money to pay their cash bail. So typically, a judge, after somebody is arrested, is basing a bail decision on a bond schedule. A bond schedule is a list of charges or allegations with corresponding money amounts that go up based on severity. So nationally, 500,000 people languish in jail simply because they don't have enough money to pay that initial release price. It's literally freedom and culpability based on how much money or wealth you have at that initial onset. Many people consider cash bail as the front door of mass incarceration. So looking at the numbers broadly, 6 out of 10 people are held in jail pre-trial. When I say pre-trial, and you'll hear this a lot within the bail reform movement, it refers to the period between arrest and resolution of a case, whether someone takes a plea, whether their case is entirely dismissed, whether there ends up being a final conviction. It just refers to that in-between state, that in-between period. People being held in jail simply because they can't afford that cash bail amount is known as pre-trial detention. So 6 out of every 10 people in our nation's jails are there being held pre-trial. 5 out of 6 of those individuals are there because they can't pay that initial money amount. And unconvicted people, again, people who have not been formally convicted of a crime, account for 95% of jail growth since 2000. So we're thinking about this large-scale crisis of mass incarceration. We're thinking about the mass industrial complex. Pretrial detention is one of those drivers of that issue. So these are some statistics I saw in an article on The Intercept that really struck me and I wanted to share with you all. Nationally, there are about 10 million arrests that are made by law enforcement, an arrest one in every 3 seconds. 80% of all arrests are for low-level offenses, so misdemeanors, so lowest criminal charge or allegation. 15% are for felony-related arrests, and 5% are for violent arrest. So again, we're thinking about the millions of dollars that go into law enforcement arresting people within our community. We think about the trauma that people endure during those police interactions. We think about even more trauma that they experience in jails that we know are in the midst of a conditional crisis. I'm thinking about the Summit County Jail. I'm thinking about the Cuyahoga County Jail. And again, a large majority of arrests, a large majority of people who are sitting, languishing in detention really shouldn't be there at the end of the day. So what are the consequences of being held in pretrial detention, being held simply, again, because you can't afford that moneyed amount? People who stay in jail during that period are 2 to 3 times more likely to receive a conviction, a jail or a prison sentence. And from those sentences, they're actually 3 times harsher. Why is that? When you're stuck behind bars, you're not able to readily access a lawyer. It's more likely that you have an overburdened, overbooked appointed attorney who may have 50 to 100 cases. You're not able to contact witnesses. You're not able to gather evidence. And again, you're walking into a court wearing an orange or a red jumpsuit in shackles, looking guilty to a judge. And then we pull in some of the racial, gendered biases around working class individuals within our courts. And we find that people who are stuck in jail during that pretrial period are more likely to be convicted. Cash bail literally perpetuates criminalization of poverty at its core. So some of ACLU Ohio's current bail reform goals, we have 2 historic bipartisan bail reform bills that were introduced in the legislature this last spring. The first one being Senate Bill 182, sponsored by Senator McCulley and Senator Huffman. These bills are compatible bills, they're identical in language. And House Bill 315, sponsored by longstanding Democrat Representative Leland and Representative Hillier. So what are some of the things that these bills do? Reduce Ohio's pretrial incarcerated population. Again, these are folks who have not been formally convicted of a crime. Right now, we found in our fiscal impact analysis that we released again earlier this year that 63% of people in Ohio jails are there for misdemeanors, again, that lowest criminal allegation or charge, and non-person felonies. So felonies that don't involve harm to a specific person, the number 1 charge being drug possession. As I know many of you are familiar with the harm reduction movement and involved in drug policy reform within your own communities. So the bill has provisions that would allow a judge to create a pathway for release for many of those folks, a clear pathway to bring them back to their communities and have them return the court on no or maybe limited conditions. It also ends wealth-based detention by eliminating bond schedules. Bond schedules, again, is that list of charges with corresponding moneyed amounts. So instead of a judge or a magistrate relying on a bond schedule to determine release decisions, they're going to ask 2 questions. Does this person want to flee? Can they hitch a jet, leave the state, avoid their court date? Or does this person pose some sort of specific harm to a specific individual, not this vague public safety threat, but specific harm to a specific individual? So again, instead of relying on this muddied chart essentially to determine whether someone goes free during that period, they're going to be asking those 2 questions and effectively eliminating wealth-based detention within our state. It also promotes public safety. So I know, do some of you remember Ariel Castro? Just raise your hand, some Clevelanders if you do. He was a notorious kidnapper and serial rapist. And when he was initially arrested, the judge gave him an $8 million bond. Even though the judge had the complete ability to just hold him during that pretrial period, it was clear that he was a known threat to specific people and the victims involved in that case. But instead, a judge said, I'm just going to set a really high bond and just hope and assume that he can't pay it. So with this bill, there are provisions that if there are individuals who actually do pose a specific harm to individuals, then judges can actually detain those individuals and that defendant can actually appeal that decision. So let's say there's a judge who continually is detaining Black men or Black women in their court, and they can have, during that hearing, that detention hearing, that lawyer can actually appeal that decision and say, hey, there isn't enough evidence, there isn't enough information to demonstrate that this person is a threat, and we want to appeal this decision. So again, it's expanding a lot of the due process rights and protecting people's pretrial liberty during that time. We also know when people are released back into their communities during that time, during this pretrial period, they can go back to jobs, they can go back to children, they can reestablish themselves in their lives, and we know this strengthens communities. We also know when people aren't held in jail, it will save the state a lot of money. In Cuyahoga County, it's $80 to $125 a day to hold one person in that jail. So imagine if many of those people, particularly that 63% that I was talking about, those low-level misdemeanors and non-person felonies, if they were out of that jail, imagine how that money can be reinvested within our community. In our fiscal impact analysis, we found that Ohio could save $199 to $264 million by adopting some common sense provisions around our bail reform system. So imagine what we could do with that money for our state. Invest in public health, invest in our public school system, restructure and really grapple with Ohio's crumbling infrastructure in a more serious way. There are really endless possibilities. So put simply, this is what the bill would do. In our current system, let's say we have someone arrested for drug possession, that number one reason that people are charged in the state of Ohio, people suffering from the disease of addiction. A judge will rely on this bond schedule to determine whether or not, or will determine the cash bail amount for that individual. So a judge would say, this is a drug possession case. The bail is set at maybe $3,000, and then a person can pay 10%. So if they can't pay that amount, they're likely held in jail unnecessarily. They can't contact their lawyer. They can't gather evidence. They can't contact witnesses. They're coming in from the back of the court wearing that orange jumpsuit, in shackles, unclear about how their case is actually going to unravel. And they're likely to receive a worse sentence. Let's say someone's able to get free. They hire an excellent criminal defense attorney. They contact those witnesses. They gather that evidence. They build their defense. They're wearing the clothes that they want to wear. They have a steady mind, and they can face the charges against them. So this proposed system, this is the system in Senate Bill 182 and House Bill 315. That same individual is arrested for drug possession. And instead of thinking about a bond schedule or considering a bond schedule for that release decision, a judge will ask two questions. Is this person a flight risk? Does it look like they're going to evade their court date? They're going to, again, hitch that jet, leave the state, not show up for court very purposely? Or is this person a threat to a specific individual? Let's say, the person does want to actually evade and not come to their court date, which sometimes that happens. Then the judge in a hearing will determine what conditions are necessary to get that person back to court. So maybe it's going to a drug counselor. Maybe it's taking periodic drug tests within that pre-trial period. What are least restrictive conditions that, again, aren't burdening that individual, aren't creating more issues in that person's life, and that actually gets them back to court and fulfills the legal definition of bail, which is actually release to reappear in court and ensure reappearance. Or, if there aren't conditions that are necessary, maybe that person is part of that 63% where all they need is a text message reminder or just better indicators of when their court date is happening and how they should show up. They're free to go home. They can contact a better criminal defense attorney, potentially gather that evidence, build that case, go to court wearing their own clothes with a steady mind, a steady heart, and face the charges against them. So going back to the conditions and potentially that detention decision that I was talking about earlier, if a judge says, we need more conditions around a specific individual, they'll set a hearing. And at that hearing, that's when the different conditions and options will come to play. And let's say your attorney at the time is saying, these conditions don't make sense. This is really intrusive. This is too much surveillance. Again, I'm looking towards a lot of Black folks who know how conditions can be in the probation sense. Then your attorney can actually appeal some of those conditions, which is huge in this stage and is something that Ohio has never seen. And then let's say, again, there are some individuals who may actually need to be detained during that period and may actually pose a threat to another specific individual. Then they'll have a detention hearing, and a judge will have to put on paper written findings on the record why this person needs to be detained, what evidence demonstrates that this person is a clear threat to individuals. And again, that individual's lawyer can actually appeal that decision if it doesn't make sense, if it's too onerous, if it doesn't match the actual allegations or the evidence that's presented during that hearing. So instead of a bond schedule, 3 options. Release people with no conditions. Again, most people, they don't need conditions at all. They just need more effective reminders to come back to court. Set a conditions hearing where a judge will determine anything from drug testing, going to see a drug counselor, maybe it's a restraining order against an individual who's involved in the case. And again, you can appeal that decision if it's too onerous or it doesn't make sense, or again, that final detention decision. Okay, so now the fun starts here. We're going to be breaking out in rooms. Room 1 is text banking with Greer. I know that there are some of you who've already heard this bail reform teach-in many times in Cuyahoga County. So if you're interested in texting your loved ones, your family and friends about this issue, you're going to choose room 1. And if you're interested in getting your testimony ready for proponent hearings for the House Criminal Justice Committee coming up in September, you're going to be in room 2 with me, and I'm just going to be going over best practices for submitting testimony. Okay, so right now, there's been 1 proponent hearing or supporter hearing for Senate Bill 182. You can actually watch some of that on the Ohio channel. I'm going to actually include that link maybe in the follow-up email because some of the testimony was really groundbreaking. But we know that in late September, we think that there's going to be a House Criminal Justice proponent hearing. So we're trying to gather as much written testimony as possible and get folks ready, because I think, you know, with the anti-protest bill, with the anti-CRT bills, with you know, trying to repeal House Bill 6, I know that the progressive community has a lot on its plate. So the sooner that we can draft these testimonies, the better. So as we know, Ohioans have a real need for bail reform. On any given day, 63% of people in our jails are there for misdemeanors and non-person felonies. The majority of those folks need help and have committed quality of life crimes if they've actually committed crimes at all. So bail reform and enacting bail reform not only save the state money, it's really morally the right thing to do, and ending criminalization of poverty is something I know CCPC and the ACLU are particularly passionate about. So we've been gathering a coalition of organizations for several years now to actually stand up to the OGA around not only bail, but criminal legal system issues. And this presentation is sort of an overview of how to submit testimony, particularly around criminal legal system bills. So the bills will focus on provisions that will reduce Ohio's pretrial incarcerated population, end this practice of wealth-based detention, promote public safeties, strengthen our communities, and save the state big money. There are a few things that aren't in this bill. This is a completely clean bail reform bill. This isn't, you know, several bills actually put in and somehow made into this bill. I know that our legislature likes to combine bills very often, but this is a straight bail reform bill. There also isn't data collection within this bill, which we know on a lot of criminal legal issues, data collection is a complete non-starter to our legislature. So as much as we'd like to see a little bit more transparency and accountability around that data collection, we know that it's more likely to pass without this feature. And it also doesn't include risk assessments. So a big trend around pretrial reform within the last 10 to 15 years have been risk algorithms. These are algorithms that determine how risky someone is to either flee or commit a new crime. These algorithms are typically incorrect. They're rife with racial bias within the system. And the way that I like to put it is it's racially biased input in and racially biased output immediately after. So risk assessments are a non-starter, and there's so many better ways to end the practice of wealth-based detention that we see in this bill. So just kind of an FYI, if folks are kind of interested where risk assessments fall in this legislation and where data collection is. So some key points: pick which committee that you'd like to submit your testimony to, identify that you're submitting proponent or supportive testimony, make sure that you have the correct bill number. We think that House Bill 315, those proponent hearings are going to be first. Identify which type of testimony that you're submitting, add the date, your name, address the chair of the committee that you picked, and sort of write out why bail reform is something that needs to happen in the state of Ohio. So other tips, try to keep your testimony around 1 page if possible. Don't be worried about getting too bogged down on bill specifics or the policies. It's completely okay to use talking points that maybe ACLU or CCPC have already put together and just adding your own tweak. And remember that personal experience is probably the most powerful aspect of this. If you or someone you know had to bail someone out, put that in the testimony, because those are stories and experiences that our legislature is not hearing. I have a colleague who used to work at the Ohio legislature pretty recently, and he said for every single testimony that got submitted, the legislators would think there are 50 other people who have similar or maybe identical experience as that one personal experience. So testimony, particularly around personal experience, is very important. So just a quick template of what this would look like. Make sure that you're addressing the right committee. We think this is going to be in the House Criminal Justice Committee very soon. Make sure that you identify that it's proponent testimony and identify the correct bill. So it's Ohio House Bill 315. And, depending on if you're willing to go in person, but I don't see them doing any virtual testimony anytime soon, I recommend putting down written testimony unless you'd like to come with us to Columbus and actually testify, which may be an option depending on the COVID situation. So pick one. So for the House, you're going to be addressing Chairman LeRae, Ranking Member Leland, and members of the House Criminal Justice Committee. So crafting the testimony. At the top, identify who you are, that you're a resident of whatever town, whatever county, whatever township you want to identify. Thank them for the opportunity to submit proponent testimony and explicitly mention the bill. So one thing that I've seen is that people have written beautiful testimony, but they forget to actually identify what bill they're testifying for, and then it never actually gets submitted or uploaded to the Ohio legislature site. So be sure to mention what bill that you're actually submitting proponent testimony for. And then maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs is completely okay. Even if it's 1 paragraph, it's still powerful to have those numbers. So some reasons that we've listed, and we'll also send out a PDF version of this PowerPoint as well as a fuller testimony template where I've screenshotted some of these. Are you concerned about how unnecessary pretrial detention harms people's lives, putting them at risk of losing employment, jobs, housing, even custody of their children? Are you upset about the dollars that are wasted keeping people in jail necessarily? So even if you don't know anyone who's had an issue with the cash bail system, or you're not familiar with the mass incarceration system at all, as a taxpayer, you're paying for your jails to operate the way that they are. You're paying for people who've not been formally convicted of a crime to be held behind bars. So this is something that affects all of us, because those same legislators are saying the state is devoid of funds for our public schools, for our roads, for a whole host of issues that they say we just don't have enough money for, but they're pouring funds into our mass incarceration system. So if you want to talk about that alone, that's a very strong reason to support this bill, and they need to hear about it. Are you upset that people who remain pretrial are more likely to get convicted, which shows that we have a justice system that makes decisions based on resources instead of culpability? Many people instinctively know, our justice system, if you're wealthy, you're going to have a different shot at justice than other people, but they can't necessarily describe why or some of the systems involved. Cash bail is one of the leading drivers of mass incarceration nationally, and one of the leading drivers of mass incarceration in the state of Ohio. This, I know, upsets everybody here. Are you concerned about the significant racial disparities that have been identified in bail setting practices? So we know that Black people get higher bail than white counterparts, even controlling for charge and criminal history. We know that Black people are less likely to get no cash bail, which is an option known as own recognizance or personal recognizance. And we know that there are so many explicit and implicit factors that go into racially biased systems within our criminal legal system. Are you supporting this bill on racial justice grounds? That could be a wonderful testimony as well. And have you benefited from this unjust system and still recognize that it's unjust? I know a lot of people who tell me, my parents were able to pay that cash bill the first time I got arrested when I was in my early 20s, and that changed the course of my life. Not having a record changed the course of my life. Not having a similar experience as someone who may have actually committed that allegation with me. And so is this something that you'd want to describe? And at the end, of course, you ask them to consider your testimony and vote yes on this critically important bill. And don't forget the witness slip. Again, your testimony will not be considered without the witness slip. In our testimony template, I'm going to send that to you, Steve. We're going to include a kind of a PDF version of this witness slip. All right. So that's really all I had. And then the last 15 minutes of this is going to be actually drafting the testimony itself. So I know, Steve, you had a really good reason for not putting links within the chat, but I'm just going to put this one while we're kind of drafting.
Are we drafting a joint?
Sorry, say that one more time.
Are we drafting one with all of us together, or?
I think we can draft them individually and just kind of talk through talk through questions that people have. Really, if you want to do one from CCPC, you could, but I think it would be more powerful to have the numbers.
Well, yeah, and that's what we've done in the past. I have submitted testimony on behalf of the organization, and then we've had our members do on behalf of them as individuals.
Yeah, I mean, whatever you feel is best. I'm also going to link the submitted testimonies for Senate Bill 182. So maybe if you all wanted to look at those and see how people have sort of drafted these, let me drop those links.
I'm on my phone, so I won't really be able to write it now, but I'll, since you're going to be sharing the links, will I have access to those after the meeting's over, like through email or?
Most certainly. And I'm going to send all of that information in the follow-up email. And let me send this bill teaching portion too. That could be helpful.
You're going to send me all that stuff to get in the email?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. I really like that. You send the links as well as the video. That's very helpful.
Well, yeah, and sending it to people who registered will cover the folks who aren't here and might be interested. If they registered, chances are they're somewhat interested to start.
Hi, Zachary. Good to see you, or good to have you present here. Are you working
Hello.
for Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition?
Yeah, yes, I am. It's good to see you
That's
too. The
great.
name of the
Yeah.
page.
Yeah, I was like, I wonder if this is the same person. So we kind of blew through this testimony training. So forgive me, Yana and Steve, I'm gonna just kind of go over the core components, but the two links that I put in the chat, one of them is kind of a shortened bail reform teach-in going over the issues of cash bail, the devastating impacts, core components of Senate Bill 182 and House Bill 315. And then this room was setting people up to actually write their own testimony and some tips that we had.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
So I might get going because I can't really participate in writing now since I'm not at my computer. So
Would you be interested in joining the other room for text banking?
I don't think so. I don't think I'm ready to text bank yet.
Understandable. Well, thank you so much for joining and participating in this.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really informative.
Okay, Melissa, could you put me in the text bank one?
Yeah.
I just would like to see both. And I've done testimony before. I think I could probably figure it out on my own.
understand. I
no,
was like, this is CCPC. I know that they do a lot of that kind of advocacy. Yeah, let me do that now. And Steve, I have this down for wrapping up around 7:30. Is that still good?
sure. We like to send these emails out, early afternoon. So if I had the links, then if not, that's okay. But
Yeah, I can grab them for you, and I can send. I know there were some people who registered on Monday. There was a big jump, so I'll send those folks as well. All right, Steve, I'm going to move you to room 1. All right. So there are 2 historic bipartisan bail reform bills that have been introduced in our state house this last spring. Senate Bill 182 and House Bill 315. These are compatible bills with identical language that have provisions that can genuinely radically change Ohio's pretrial system. So Ohio is in desperate need for reform. Right now, there are 9,000 to 12,000 people daily who languish behind bars simply because they don't have enough money to pay that initial cash bail amount. And this is in the state of Ohio. And nationally, that number is about 500,000 people who languish in jail because they can't afford that cash bail. And people who are held pretrial are twice as likely to be convicted. Those sentences are actually 3 times harsher, just based on the myriad of reasons that make your case compromised when you're behind bars and when you're in that pretrial state. You can't contact your lawyer, you can't gather evidence, you really can't contact witnesses, you can't build a defense in the same way that you would when you're free. And so you walk into a courtroom wearing maybe a red or orange jumpsuit in shackles. The judge already has that implicit bias around presumption of guilt, particularly for people of color, particularly for LGBTQ and working class Ohioans. And this leads to what we know, criminalization of poverty at its core. So in our fiscal impact analysis that we released earlier this year, we found that 63% of people in Ohio jails are there for misdemeanors, that the lowest criminal charge, and non-person felonies. So felonies that don't involve any harm to a specific person, with the #1 charge being drug possession. So 63% of people who are sitting in Ohio jails are there for offenses that, from jaywalking to writing a bad check to non-person felonies that usually involved the disease of addiction, particularly around those drug possession charges. So we know that the state is ripe for reform, and bail reform is really not only morally the right thing to do, but politically and on policy perspective, this could really end wealth-based detention within our state. So the ACLU of Ohio has been working with partners for a number of years. I've had the pleasure of working with Ivanka within the Jail Coalition around pretrial reform issues since 2018. And now that we have bail reform bills, we really have a chance to have an organizing vehicle to get these bills past the finish line. And that's where these 2 bills come in. And again, those bills are Senate Bill 182, that's sponsored by Senator Huffman, and I'm blanking on the other senator right now, but House Bill 315 is sponsored by Representative Leland, a longstanding Democrat in the House, as I'm sure you know, and Representative Hillier. So this really is a true bipartisan effort, particularly in the House. So these bills have provisions that will reduce Ohio's pretrial incarcerated population. It would give judges a clear pathway to release folks with no conditions. So that's 63% that I was talking about. Many of those people who are there for misdemeanors, are there for non-person felonies, really just need a court reminder to get them back to court. This bill would create a pathway for judges to release them. would also end wealth-based detention by eliminating bond schedules. So right now, if someone gets arrested, a judge or a magistrate relies on a bond schedule to determine what that bail is. A bond schedule is just a list of charges with corresponding money amounts that go up based on severity of the charge. So this bill would completely remove or eliminate bond schedules and would make judges ask 3 questions. Is this person a flight risk? Is there clear and convincing evidence that would show this person wants to completely evade their court date? They can, hitch a jet, leave the state, completely evade the court date that's set before them? Or is this person a threat to a specific person and not this vague notion of public safety, which we know harms Black and brown folks? And there's a lot of fear mongering around public safety within our criminal legal system, but will this individual actually harm a specific person? And so if that's the case, a judge will set a conditions hearing, and at that hearing, they'll determine what are the restrictions or conditions that are necessary to ensure that this person comes back to court. Is it maybe speaking to a drug counselor? Is it, potentially having a restraining order against a specific person involved in the allegation? What are the measures and least restrictive measures that will ensure that this person will come back to court? And during that conditions hearing, the defendant, that individual, will actually have counsel present, which is huge. And of course, there's a very, very small group of Ohioans who actually do pose a threat to a specific person. So in that case, a judge will have a detention hearing and they'll have to put on record. And again, this is something that judges don't do, and there's very little monitoring and accountability when it comes to judicial discretion and decision-making in this case. But they'll have to have clear and convincing evidence that this person needs to be detained at this time. And again, that individual will have an opportunity to appeal that decision. So let's say we have a judge who's, every Black person that's coming to their court, they're saying detention, detention, detention. Then that lawyer can say, actually, this person doesn't need to be detained. Here's why. This is not clear and convincing evidence that detention is what this individual needs. We have to go back and set a conditions hearing and start from there. So this bill would really essentially make release as the de facto norm, and then base bail decisions on individual circumstances instead of everybody who can't afford their bail or 10% of their bail immediately just stays detained pre-trial. So we know that this would actually promote public safety because people who are potentially dangerous but can pay that very high cash bail amount won't have the opportunity to leave and potentially flee. And we know that when people are returned back into their communities, back to their jobs, back to their children, and nourishing their communities and going back to their livelihoods, this strengthens our communities. And this will, again, save the state big money. So in Cuyahoga County right now, it costs about $80 to $125 to hold one person in that decrepit jail. So if we can think about, again, that's 63%. If those folks are out of jail, how can the state actually save money? And with our fiscal impact analysis, we found that the state could save $199 to $264 million with some common sense provisions that this bill actually has within them. So we know that this bill would also save the state a lot of money. There's a huge fiscal impact with this, which frankly, I think that's why Republicans are trying to get ahead of this as much as possible. And we know that this money can be reinvested into healthcare, into our public schools, into Ohio's crumbling infrastructure. There's so many possibilities for where these funds could go. Some things that the bill does not include. It doesn't include risk assessments, and risk assessments are algorithms that say that they can identify the level of risk that an individual has for recommitting a new crime or fleeing. But we also know that these algorithms are biased, they contain many errors, and they also reflect the racial bias within our criminal legal systems. I like to say that just racist input in will produce racist output. There's no way to have an unvalidated, fair risk assessment tool. So it's great that these bills actually don't have a risk assessment tool or rely heavily on risk assessment instruments. It also doesn't include data collection, but we know at the ACLU that criminal legal reform bills that have a data collection component usually are non-starters in our legislature. So again, I think there are other bills that are trying to push data collection and a lot of talk around a criminal justice sentencing database, but data collection is not included in this bill. And it's a clean bail reform bill. So there isn't a mention of drug policy reform. There isn't a mention of, sometimes other bills get inserted into a bill that they think is going to pass. This is a clean bail reform bill. So some key points, and again, I think this is more of a redundant review for you as someone involved in policy at your capacity, but picking which committee that you want to submit to, identify that you're submitting proponent testimony, making sure that you have the bill number correct so it doesn't get sort of lost with all of the submissions that get sent to Lorraine's office, adding the date, your name, and addressing the chair of the committee that you picked, and then really ending with a clear, maybe one-page explanation of why you support these bills. So some other tips: keep your testimony to one page as possible. Don't be, too concerned about getting buried in all of the specifics of the bill if you wanted to keep it simple. And some of the most effective testimony, as we know, is personal experience. So just a basic testimony template of what this looks like. Make sure, we think that the House Criminal Justice Committee is going to be where the next proponent hearing is happening. So make sure you're picking that. Identifying the correct bill, Ohio House Bill 315. Identifying the chair, so Chairman Lorraine, Ranking Member Leland, and members of the House Criminal Justice Committee. And then this template, which again is going to be sent to everybody who registered for this event. Identifying yourself at the top, thanking members of the committee for an opportunity to testify, and then making maybe a few paragraphs about why bail reform is something that the state needs. So concern around pretrial detention and how this harms people by making them at risk of losing their jobs, their home, custody of their children. If you're upset about the fiscal impact, the fact that Ohio spends millions of dollars caging people who've not been formally convicted of a crime. Are you upset that we have a justice system that bases decisions on resources instead of culpability? If you want to kind of go for more of a moral angle there. If you're concerned about public safety, because those who potentially may pose significant threats to our society, if they can, get out of jail based on a high bail amount, that doesn't necessarily promote public safety within our community. Or if you're concerned about the racial disparity within our criminal legal system, there are just a wealth of reasons to support these bills. And then end with voting yes on this critical bill and an opportunity to testify. I see that we have one more minute. Don't forget the witness slip. And some other mentions, email your testimony and witness slips at least 24 hours before the hearings to the aide. It's going to be Lorraine's aide. So we put an email address here. And if you have any questions about submitting drafts or just want someone, another pair of eyes to edit, feel free to email myself or my supervisor, Elizabeth Hopkins. Does anyone have any questions or just reflections about what you've learned today, or how bail reform sort of interacts or engages with a lot of the other work CCPC does, or just any final comments?
Melissa? Hi.
Hi.
I would love to be able to send that video to people about bail. So if I can get a copy of that and post it to my Facebook page or send it in an email, I would like that.
Great. Yeah, it's on YouTube. I'll also include it in some of the links that I sent to Steve.
Yeah, we're going to send out a bunch of links tomorrow, as well as a YouTube recording of this event. And you guys will get it. We're sending it to all the registrants and like the 30 people who registered and didn't show up as well. So you'll get an email sometime tomorrow.
Okay.
All right. Well, this was wonderful. I know CCPC has been a longstanding partner. I think it was 2017 or 2018. I know you signed on to Criminal Rule 46 and was one of the first organizations that did that in support of an administrative rule. We were trying to, before there was a bail reform legislation, we were trying to actually change the rule that guides judicial decisions around bail and sort of have a kind of a top-down tactic. So CCPC was an early signee then, and I'm just grateful to continue the partnership. And I'll be sure to send some of those links and updated action items. One other thing that I want to mention, we have a Cuyahoga County action team that meets the first Thursday at 5 p.m. virtually. Our next meeting is actually going to be on the 2nd of this week, Thursday at 5 p.m. So if you're interested in getting more involved, if you want to kind of jump into committees specifically around bail reform, I'd love to see you all there. And I'm going to drop my email in the chat as well. Steve, any final announcements?
No, look for the email tomorrow, and thank you all for coming. Have a good evening.
And thank you, Greer.
And thank you, Greer. Yes.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.